Blood is a specialized connective tissue in the human body. It serves several functions, including transporting oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, and hormones, protection through immunity and clotting, and regulating the body's temperature and pH. Blood is made up of formed elements and plasma. Plasma is a liquid composed of mostly water and proteins. Formed elements, on the other hand, comprise three things: red blood cells, known as erythrocytes, white blood cells, known as leukocytes, and platelets, which are not full cells but rather cell fragments. Blood cell production occurs in the red bone marrow. It occurs throughout the lifespan but increases when there is a greater need. The amount of blood in the human body is about the same for everyone, with only minor differences on average between males and females.
Erythrocytes, commonly called red blood cells, are formed from pluripotent stem cells, which mature to lack a nucleus and most organelles. It clears a way to be filled with hemoglobin molecules, providing a maximum oxygen carrying capacity. In addition, its unique biconcave disc allows for a large surface to volume ratio for optimal gas exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, provides the much needed oxygen for cellular respiration. However, with its short lifespan of 120 days, a large amount of red blood cells die each day. However, the body can replace the same rate as it dies. In cases of sickle cell anemia, the mutated red blood cells of the hemoglobin caused by the hemoglobin molecule, more red bloods die than can be replaced, as typically they die within 20 days. And as red blood cells die, cytokine proteins are released, causing an immune response, which can be exacerbated in sickle cell anemia patients, causing anemia as well as inflammatory and pain and other conditions which will be discussed later on. Leukocytes, also called white blood cells, although it makes up less than 1% of the blood component, has a very important functioning role in the body's immune response. It is also formed from the same pluripotent stem cell as the red blood cell, but matures into several different types of white blood cells to have its own unique functions. As you can see in the chart, there's several types of white blood cells, but I like to highlight that in sickle cell anemia, the mutated red blood cells that die in large numbers releases large elevated levels of cytokine proteins, which manifest in heightened increased inflammation immune response.
Here I am talking about the platelet. The platelets are tiny cell fragments made in the red bone marrow that circulate in our blood and play a key role in clotting and healing. The next slide has a picture talking about showing how the platelets healing the blood vessel wall. So when the blood vessel is damaged, platelets quickly stick to the injury sites called adhesion, become activated, change shape, and release chemical that recruit more platelets. They then clump together, it's called aggregation, to form a platelet plug, which is reinforced by a fibrin mesh from clotting factors to create a stable clot and stop bleeding. Even though they are the smallest blood component, platelets have a fundamental role in both thrombosis and hemostasis. Their adhesion, activation, and aggregation not only trigger the coagulation cascade but also support wound healing after tissue damage. Because of the crucial role, platelets' function has been studied for over 100 years and is now very important for monitoring bleeding, antiplatelet drugs, platelets dysfunction, and coagulation disorders. Understanding how platelets form clots and how this platelet thrombogenicity cascade can sometimes go wrong helps reduce complications related to abnormal bleeding or unwanted clotting formation, and even guides research into artificial platelet substitutes in the future.
Plasma makes up the bulk component of the blood, approximately 55%, and is mostly water, which makes it an ideal solvent to carry proteins, nutrients, ions, and hormones, as well as an important medium of transport of dissolved cellular waste and carbon dioxide as dissolved iron bicarbonate, as well as an important role in temperature regulation. What's important for sickle cell anemic patients is that they may require blood transfusion therapy to replace the lost red blood cells for anemia. The immunoglobulins as antibodies may reject the donor red blood cell, so it's important for cell matching, as well as bone marrow therapy for tissue transplant and tissue rejection. Furthermore, viscosity of plasma is mainly influenced by the amount or the level of fibrinogen in the plasma. Although fibrin is important for blood clotting and hemorrhaging control, fibrinogen may increase the amount of viscosity of the plasma as more red cell dies for anemic patients, and its complications will be discussed further.
Hemoglobin is a protein found inside our red blood cells. It is the primary way oxygen is transported through the body, with about 98% of oxygen being transported this way. Each hemoglobin molecule contains 4 available binding sites for oxygen, and each red blood cell contains roughly 270 million hemoglobin molecules. This means that one red blood cell can carry over 1 billion molecules of oxygen. Additionally, hemoglobin also transports about 5 to 10% of the carbon dioxide in our blood.
As previously mentioned before, normally red blood cells are biconcave, disc-shaped, and flexible, which enables them to move easily through small blood vessels. Their flexibility is essential for proper oxygen delivery. In sickle cell anemia, the hemoglobin is structurally altered, and it creates abnormal hemoglobin HbS, which tends to aggregate. That means it sticks and clumps together, which forms long, stiff rods inside red blood cells. This process is called HbS polymerization, and it's triggered by low oxygen levels. These rigid polymers distort the red blood cells into a sickle shape. And what a sickle shape is, it's deformed and it's a crescent shaped, caused by a genetic mutation that affects a hemoglobin molecule. Unlike normal red blood cells, sickle cells are more rigid, stiffer, they cannot bend or move easily, so they tend to be less flexible, more frail, and prone to rupture. Because they are so stiff, they cannot move smoothly through small blood vessels and can potentially slow or block blood circulation to the rest of the body. Recapping what hemoglobin is, it's the protein inside of red blood cells that is responsible for carrying oxygen throughout the body. Sickle cell anemia is a hereditary disease caused by a mutation in the hemoglobin gene. Specifically, in the 6th position of the beta globin chain, glutamic acid is a hydrophilic amino acid, meaning it attracts water. But what ends up happening in sickle cell anemia, glutamic acid is substituted by valine, and valine is a hydrophobic amino acid which repels water. Because of this small change, it significantly alters the structure and function of hemoglobin, leading to the production of abnormal hemoglobin HbS instead of producing normal hemoglobin HbA. So if someone is HbA, they are normal, healthy, and they do not carry the sickle cell trait. But if someone is HbA, they are considered heterozygous and they do have the sickle cell trait. Carriers with the HbA/HbS, they are usually healthy, but they do experience mild anemia because half of their hemoglobin is normal and half of their hemoglobin is abnormal. This is due to their sickle cell trait. And if someone is HbS/HbS, they are considered homozygous for the mutation and they do have sickle cell disease. In conclusion, this single amino acid substitution is the main cause of this disease. Sickle cell anemia does come with other major side effects. For example, there's vaso-occlusion. What ends up happening is that the sickle red blood cells stick to each other and they stick to the blood vessel walls, blocking blood flow. This leads to tissue ischemia, swelling, acute pain, organ damage, and increases susceptibility to infections. Another problem occurring would be altered blood. So the presence of sickle cells increases blood viscosity, meaning that the blood becomes thicker and it flows poorly. Sickle cell anemia signals ongoing hemolysis. What that is that the sickled red blood cells break down rapidly, causing chronic anemia and releasing free hemoglobin, which increases oxidative stress. Overall, this damages the blood vessel lining and worsens blockages. Another major side effect would be ischemia reperfusion injury. So cycles of blockages and restoration of blood flow leads to further tissue damage due to reactive oxygen species. In conclusion, oxygen delivery is reduced and blood vessels can become blocked. So patients with sickle cell anemia, they tend to have a higher risk of complications that leads to strokes and heart attack.